My pick of the games from round 5 of the Biel Grandmaster tournament is Maxime Vachier-Lagrave from France against Nico Georgiadis from Switzerland. Now these two were at the bottom of the tournament table going into the 5th round. Nico had scored a draw against Magnus Carlsen in the previous round, but had just half out of 4. And Maxime Vachier-Lagrave, incredibly, only had 1 point out of 4. He's 5-time champion here in Biel. Of course, a permanent fixture in the top 10 in the world, so a real surprise that he's had such a poor start. Anyway, Maxime with white opened with c4, and the line that they both selected is very theoretical and pretty sharp. After d5, e5 comes, and black threatens the knight with d4. This is taken. White recaptures. So material is even, but we have a situation where white is able to claim the center with d4. It's important here that black hits out straight away. Otherwise, white will play bishop d3 and get castled. Black has to watch out for bishop g5, winning a queen. And with a nice center and a really easy development for pieces, white stands well. So it's imperative that black hits out with e5. And now Maxime has had this position before, and previously he played bishop g5 against Hikaru Nakamura with great complications after h4. But today he selected a more modest move, bishop e2, but it also has its venom. After pawn takes pawn, bishop g5, you can see that white is just giving up a pawn for really speedy piece development, piece activity. And black has to be extremely careful here. So for example, in a game between Dubov and Nakamura, Nakamura took on c3 here, very dangerous, and he succumbed to a nice attack from white. But instead, Nico played more pragmatically with bishop e7. Bishop d3 anyway. And now here's where black has to be very careful. So for example, if bishop f5, which looks pretty normal to bring a piece out, then white will exchange off the bishops and play rook to e1, which for the moment just prevents black from castling because of the threat obviously to the knight on e7, and black does not have an easy time here. So Nico played more pragmatically and just removed the queen like that. So this was taken, and pawn takes pawn and castle. So we have a very typical position for this line actually, with white having nice center pawns, but as black has managed to exchange a couple of minor pieces off the board, then black can hope to kind of calm the play down, and also the queen doesn't stand badly in the middle of the board. But there are certain things that are advantageous to white. One is the fact that this bishop points at h7, so black always has to be wary of tactics. That pawn can be loose. Sometimes the queen can be prodded with pawn, and rook e1 played by Maxime in this position is a little bit unfortunate for black. Black would love to be able to challenge the rook on the e-file, but he has to sort out this problem. Should he move the knight straight away? That's what we'd like to do, but then either rook b1 or perhaps bishop e4 first. This is very comfortable for white because black is unable, of course, to bring out the bishop straight away, and moves like c6 might be met by rook b1 And you can see it's still difficult for black to develop the queen's bishop successfully. White certainly has some pressure there. There's also bishop f5, which is again a very natural move to exchange off that dangerous bishop on d3. But here again white has a little bit of initiative. So for example, if queen f6, now it's possible to play bishop c4 here. That's rather annoying because now that bishop can't really be challenged on that diagonal. So again, comfortable play for white. Or if white wants, it's possible to play rook takes knight. Now if queen takes rook, then bishop takes bishop is obviously good for white with bishop and knight against rook. So bishop takes bishop. Now of course not queen takes because the queen takes rook, but rook takes pawn. So white wins a pawn. Question is, how much compensation does black have in this position? The bishop is on a very nice diagonal, but obviously white is better here. It's not so complicated. So white has a choice of pleasant lines against bishop f5. So not quite seeing how he can equalize the position. Nico played b6, discouraging c5, but also preparing to bring the bishop to the long diagonal. Reasonable. But here Maxime invested 17 minutes and came up with c5. So he's sharpening the play right from the outset, and I think he's right to do this while black hasn't quite developed his pieces, and while, for example, the knight is targeted by the rook, while this pawn is a little bit vulnerable, while the queen, is slightly a bit of a target in the middle. All these things come together, and there's a loose rook in the corner as well. Don't forget that. So tactically, this is definitely the right moment to strike. Now Nico played here queen f6. Big question is what would happen if the pawn on c5 is captured? Well, pawn takes pawn, and now queen takes pawn, rook c1, and you can see how dangerous this is. So now the second rook joins in the attack. So the queen comes back to d6. Looks like everything's fine for the moment, but then comes bishop takes pawn check. Has to be taken. The queens are exchanged, and then the knight can be taken. Now white is obviously better here. White has the better pawn structure and very active rooks as well, but black could hope to draw that just because there are so few pawns on the board. But depends on your taste. You could try that, or in this position it's possible to play knight g5 and just carry on with the initiative. Obviously h7 is attacked. If bishop f5, then bishop c4, very interesting move, targeting f7, and even after the exchange of queens, white would have a very dangerous initiative. So again, Nico couldn't be sure of that, saw that it was very difficult to quell white's initiative, so played instead queen f6. And then came bishop e4, a very tricky move. And here, rook b8 is probably the best move, although after exchanging, white certainly has a nice initiative as that pawn is on prise, perhaps a rook coming into the middle. You can see that white's lead in development gives him a really nice initiative. But instead, again, wanting to try to keep things under control, Georgiadis played c6. Unfortunately, he'd overlooked a tactic. It happens so often when there's a bishop pointing at h7. Queen b1 wins a pawn. h7 is attacked, but also queen takes b6. It's as simple as that. The best that Georgiadis could come up with was this, exchanging pieces. But actually it's a pretty clear pawn, this passed a pawn. And here's an interesting choice. Of course, it's possible to bring the queen back, but Maxime has a lot of faith in his technical abilities, clearly, with this move, and he heads straight for an endgame. And I really like his setup here. Of course, it seems as though black isn't doing too badly, a pawn down, but with a nicely placed knight. But watch how Vachier-Lagrave sets up his pieces here. First of all, both players solve their back rank problem with these moves. But black is active. Rook c4. So first of all, that holds both pawns. And the knight goes in behind, so supported by the rook, and just keeping tabs on that pawn on c6. Black activates. And now rook a3 and rook d3. So this is the setup that clearly Vachier-Lagrave had envisaged from a few moves back, that this rook protects the pawns, protects the knight. This rook is activated, so you can see, very important, that white is now threatening to take that pawn on c6, undermining the knight on d5. And white is so well coordinated here, you feel that his chances of winning here are much better than black's chances of drawing. I know the rook on b2 is active, but the rooks are split. This is one of my big things that I don't like. Rooks don't operate well when they're split. I know that's a generalization, but hey, I'm going to go with it. Here maybe knight f6 was better, but well, it's kind of understandable that knight e7 was played protecting this pawn. But after this, there was another way in. The knight came to e5. And now, having got that knight out of the way, the rook is available for action. So obviously, the threat again is knight takes pawn, undermining knight on d5. Georgiadis played rook b4. And then the rook came in to d7, attacking f7. And there's no way back here for black. White is just breaking through, and the game finished like this. This was rather unfortunate. After rook takes pawn, check. And here, black resigned because of the king comes up. And knight e6 forks king and rook. Well, a pretty swift ending to the game, but actually this was a very, very unpleasant position for black to defend. And I think Maxime's technique was really good there. If I can just go back to the start of that endgame, where we had this position, you know, one could be a bit phased by this with a strong black knight, but this setup that he found, completely compact, and yeah, very difficult for black to defend this. So that brought Maxime up to 2 out of 5. Carlsen and Mamedyarov drew, and so they're still in the lead. And I think I better leave it there. Thanks for watching.